been 6 months since East Palestine, the train derailment, and it's not over. That's why News Nation stays on it. All right? They have fear. They keep saying that things are toxic. Today they got results, and they confirm the worst. Joining us now, News Nation investigative correspondent Rich McHugh, here to report that the land is toxic. But let's just get the numbers. Rich, what did they learn?
Hey, Chris. So the results are the most staggering to date. Scott Smith, this independent testing expert, tested back in May, which was then 3 months. And he tested right around the derailment site and where they burned these chemicals. The data is startling, and I got to read it. 27,000% more dioxins in the soil there than a control sample in a nearby town. The EPA, I asked them about this, they said they found also in the area right around the derailment site, they found the same dioxins, 124 parts per trillion. He found them at 600,000 parts per trillion, obviously way more than they did. Residents there I've spoken to have been begging to have their soil in their homes, begging to have their soil tested. The EPA will not test them. They've told them they will not test their soil. They say you have to go ask Norfolk Southern. This is obviously a problem. The results are staggering, and it's time for people to have their homes and their lawns tested. And it's kind of a shame that this is not happening at this point.
You use the right word. Rich, thank you very much. Shame. Shame on you, federal government, for making it happen this way. Shame on you if there's nothing to hide, that you're not owning it and doing the testing and being in front of it. Shame on you. Let's bring in East Palestine resident Jessica Conard and the man who conducted the independent soil testing, Scott Smith. Scott, so they come back and say he tested wrong, right in the site is the wrong way to do it, and it depends on what kind of test you do. What are the responses?
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. First of all, the EPA is on record accepting my testing results from the certified EPA lab. And my offer remains open with the EPA to test side by side. You can't find what you don't look for. That's why we're looking for it in the soil near the derailment site. It is that simple. And you can't go 6 inches beneath the soil like some of the EPA testing. You got to test the surface, and you got to understand where the contaminated dust is settled.
All right, so let's take a look at what matters most here, which is finding out what the situation is for people's water and their homes where they live. And as you've heard, people have been asking to have their homes tested. It's not happening. So we're going to do this 2 different ways, all right? We went to somebody's house and we watched an independent tester who this community has been using to try to get some sense of what's in there, all right? We went in there, went into the basement. Why? Because if you want to know what comes into somebody's house, you know what you look through? The air handler. You look through what is monitoring the air in that place, and that's where this story starts.
When you blow up vinyl chloride, there's a whole different fingerprint to that.
Did you find that?
Yes, and we're matching the fingerprint to what has been
what else that my wife buys at the store has vinyl chloride?
To my knowledge, nothing. I mean, that's pure vinyl chloride, nothing.
This is water coming back up into your basement, not draining down from your basement.
No, it's coming up.
Sulfur Run is right underneath this house.
Is that place where everybody goes and pokes it and the stuff comes out.
And that is the water that's coming up into your basement.
Yes.
I understand why you're concerned, and I understand what you want is attention. And let's let Scott give it to you and see what he finds now. Common sense says the deeper you go, the more you find. You're saying this is the opposite.
Common sense, no, the deeper you go, the less you find.
Because
of the dust particles and how they're settled.
Because we're used to digging deep, like the truth is beneath. You're saying it's on the surface.
Yeah, it's on the surface in this particular case because of the dust and how it's settled.
There's an aspect of this that I don't understand, but Scott, the guy who was doing the testing, does. Understand, say it to people who understand, like me, about what people need to understand about the chemical process here.
Google synergistic toxicity. Best example, migraines, caffeine and aspirin. Together, they'll solve your headache. Separate, they won't. Now, the bad toxicity, there's over 50 chemicals. Dioxins can combine with vinyl chloride at low levels. That's synergistic toxicity. They combine in a way in the human body that create toxicity. There are no standards for how these chemicals combine. The EPA repeatedly cites a singular exposure to a singular chemical. Totally disingenuous.
did you know that tomorrow will make it 1 year since that Norfolk Southern train derailment disaster in East Palestine, Ohio? Toxic fumes, town poisoned. Let's bring in News Nation correspondent Rich McHugh, independent scientist Scott Smith, who's done a lot of the testing in the town because a lot of others aren't doing the testing, not to the satisfaction of the locals. And one of those locals, East Palestine resident Christy Hilton. You saw her when I was at her house in September. It's good to have each of you here. It's good to see you most of all. Christy, it's good to have you. Rich, what do we know about the state of play?
It's not good, Chris. If I had to put it bluntly, it's the federal response here 1 year in has been its own slow motion train wreck. People are sick, first of all. They have acute needs. There is no long-term health monitoring plan, which was promised time and time again to this community. There's no disaster declaration, which is sitting on President Biden's desk to sign, but he has not signed it. He has obviously not been here. The EPA has basically been taking a victory lap this past week, saying there's, tremendous work has been done at the site itself, and they're saying there's no visible sign of contamination in the air, in the water, in the soil. I went out yesterday. We've done this time and again in the past year. I went out yesterday with Dr. Rick Chai, just in town here in the creeks in the park, and you can see with your naked eye. You stir up the sediment just in the creek in town, and you can see the chemicals. So there's massive distrust when people in town see this, and then they hear the EPA saying that. It's like they don't know who to trust, and they're fed up.
Well, I trust you, and I appreciate you doing the job, Rich, and so does that community, because, they're not getting enough attention. So, Scott Smith, I pivot to you, and they say, yeah, listen, Smith is doing his tests, but he's being real particular, okay? And there are a lot of chemicals that we're all exposed to with what we clean and what we eat and what we drink and in the environment. You can pick up lots of things. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to be, toxified. What do you think of that notion, and what have you seen over time in your samples?
Chris, first of all, thanks for having me, and you are a direct witness because you were with me for this testing. And let me tell you, and Christy Hilton specifically is very important to all of East Palestine, and here's why. She vacated that house and wasn't back. That completely defeats the narrative, chemicals in her house, her lifestyle, because that house was vacant. And the furnace filter, the soil showed dramatic increases in contamination, about 325% in soil from when I tested it with News Nation in May to when I tested it with you.
So they say to you, Scott, listen, we're digging things up. It may be bad for a little bit because we're disrupting it, but it's all going to settle and we're remediating and it'll be better long term. Do you buy that?
At this time, no. I will buy it when the testing tells me that's the case, because there's something no one's talking about, the third event, the remediation that started after April 18th, after the EPA shut down a lot of their important testing. So that third event with potentially dioxin dust particles and a whole host of other issues.